Watching this, someone just like you is scrolling through their feed, liking photos, leaving emojis, maybe posting a vacation pic of their own, completely unaware that everything they believe about their life could change with just one unexpected message. You're about to hear a story that begins exactly like that. But stay with me, because where it ends, you won't see coming. This isn't just a random internet mystery. This is about something real. Something that could happen to anyone, including you. And by the time we're done here, you'll understand why this woman's story is blowing up online, why millions are searching for answers, digging into her past, trying to figure out who the stranger was and what he knew. So, don't skip. Don't click away. Because you're going to get the answer you came here for, and I promise, you'll feel chills when the truth is finally revealed. Let me take you back to the start of this whole thing. It was mid-July, summer in full swing. You know the vibe. Sunlit beaches, iced coffee in hand, playlists blasting through Bluetooth speakers, and 1,000 strangers smiling into camera lenses, capturing curated versions of paradise. Among them was 28-year-old Julia Marks, a graphic designer from Denver who had saved for over a year to take the dream vacation she'd been fantasizing about since her college days. Hawaii. Maui, to be exact. A getaway that was supposed to be nothing more than a reset button. She wasn't chasing love, wasn't running from heartbreak, wasn't even trying to find herself. Julia just wanted to unplug, soak in the ocean breeze, and feel like her life was finally moving forward again after a year of nothing but deadlines and burnout. She checked into her beachfront Airbnb, dropped her bags, and like anyone in 2025, immediately pulled out her phone to snap the view. It was breathtaking, the kind of sunset that doesn't need a filter. And then a quick selfie. No makeup, just natural light, wind in her hair, and that easy kind of smile you only get when you're finally, truly relaxed. She posted it on Instagram with a casual caption, "Finally made it. Palm tree sun, #island time, #no filter needed." That was it. No deeper meaning, no hidden emotion. Just a moment. But that moment would be the first domino. Now pause for a second and think about this. How many photos have you posted online without thinking twice? 10? 100? 1,000? Julia had no idea that someone, somewhere, was looking at that picture with a completely different set of eyes. Not a friend. Not a follower. Not even someone she knew. A total stranger. A man who had never interacted with her before. And yet, the second he saw that photo, he recognized something. Something hidden. Something almost no one else would have noticed. And when he left his comment, just one short sentence, it didn't just catch her attention. It upended her reality. Now, before I tell you what he wrote, let me ask you something. Have you ever read a comment so unexpected, so specific, that it stopped you cold? Something that felt like it was meant only for you, even if it came from someone you'd never met? That's what happened to Julia. Only, the difference here is what this stranger knew about her. He shouldn't have known at all. He couldn't have known. Unless, well, we'll get to that. Because once you hear what he said, you'll start asking the same questions she did. And the answers, let me tell you, go deeper than you think. But first, let's talk about Julia. You need to understand who she is to really feel the weight of what comes next. Born and raised in Boulder, Colorado, Julia was adopted as an infant. Her parents, John and Marlene Marks, had always been open with her about it. There was no drama, no secrecy. She grew up in a loving home, with strong family values, great education, and a relatively calm life. Sure, she wondered now and then about her biological roots, but never enough to dig. She'd always felt loved, grounded, normal, which is what makes what happens next so disturbing. Because it wasn't just a comment on her looks. It wasn't someone sliding into her DMs to flirt or troll. It was a sentence that hinted at a secret. A secret only someone from her past could have known. The comment, posted under her selfie less than 5 minutes after she uploaded it, read, "I remember that birthmark. You're not supposed to be alive." Let that sink in for a second. Imagine you're on vacation. You're happy. You feel free. You post a harmless selfie. And then, bam, that comment shows up. From a stranger. No mutual followers. No other posts. Just that chilling message. Now, ask yourself, what would you do? Julia didn't panic at first. She thought it was a joke. Maybe a weird bot. Maybe a prank. But the more she looked at that profile, the more uneasy she felt. The account had no name. Just a string of random numbers. No posts. No bio. But it had been active for years. That meant it wasn't newly made to spam her. It had existed. Watching. Waiting. And whoever was behind it knew about the tiny crescent-shaped birthmark on her right collarbone, something she rarely ever showed in photos and almost never talked about. Not even most of her friends knew she had it. Which raised the question, how could this person have seen it? And what did they mean by, "You're not supposed to be alive"? That night, Julia couldn't sleep. She kept checking the comment, rereading it, refreshing the stranger's profile. By morning, the comment had vanished. Deleted. And the account?
Gone.
No trace. Like it had never existed. Now, most people might try to brush that off.
Call it a glitch. Move on.
But Julia couldn't. Something about that sentence burrowed into her thoughts. She started to question things she'd never questioned before. What did her adoption file actually say? Who were her biological parents? Were there things her family didn't know, or never told her? This is where the story takes a turn. Because the deeper Julia dug, the stranger things got. First, she contacted the adoption agency. They told her birth records were sealed, which isn't uncommon. But when she pushed, she discovered something unsettling. There was no official record of her biological mother's identity. No last name. No address. Not even a hospital listed on her birth certificate. It was a private adoption, they said, handled quietly, off the books, by a lawyer who had since passed away. Julia's parents had trusted the system, but the system had left no trail. Or so it seemed. And here's where you need to stay locked in, because what happens next is what makes this story go viral. It's what makes people binge-watch the footage, rewatch the video, share it with friends late at night, asking, "Have you heard about the girl with the selfie?" It's what turns this from a weird internet mystery into a full-blown, real-world investigation. Because while most people would have let it go, Julia didn't. She started chasing the shadows. Digging into old forums, scanning Reddit threads about secret adoptions, checking databases of missing persons. And eventually she found something. Or rather someone. A woman. A woman whose story mirrored her own, except for one key difference. That woman's baby had died shortly after birth, or so she'd been told. And the photo of that baby, taken just hours before the supposed death, revealed something shocking. A crescent-shaped birthmark. In exact same place as Julia's. I know what you're thinking. Coincidence, right? But wait. Because this is just the beginning. Julia reached out to the woman. What happened in their first meeting will leave you speechless. And the truth about what really happened all those years ago? It's darker than anything Julia or anyone watching could have imagined.
So, stay with me.
Because the next part of the story is where things truly unravel. Trust me when I say the comment was just the beginning. What that stranger knew and why he knew it is a secret that was never meant to be uncovered. But Julia isn't the kind of person who gives up easily. And as she peels back each layer of her past, one thing becomes terrifyingly clear. Someone out there is still watching her. And they're not done yet. Back home in Denver, life hadn't exactly been picture-perfect for Julia in the months leading up to her trip. From the outside, everything looked fine. Steady job at a mid-sized creative agency, a modest but stylish apartment downtown, a circle of friends she could call on for weekend brunch or a last-minute movie night. But under the surface, she'd been struggling. Her relationship with her boyfriend, Mark, had ended abruptly after 3 years together. No betrayal, no explosive argument, just a slow, suffocating drift apart that left her questioning what she really wanted in life. He said she'd changed. She told herself people grow. But deep down, there was a sense that something inside her had always felt unsettled. Rootless. Like she didn't quite fit, even in her own skin. She'd never admitted that out loud, not even to her closest friend, Paige. But maybe that's why the stranger's comment hit her so hard. It wasn't just the words, It was the eerie way they seemed to confirm a feeling she couldn't explain. After the message vanished, Julia found herself spiraling into obsession. She began revisiting old family photo albums, combing through childhood memories with new eyes, looking for anything that felt off. There were no glaring signs of deception, no missing years or suspicious gaps. But the more she looked, the more she noticed subtle things she'd never paid attention to before. Like how her parents never talked much about the day they brought her home. Or how there were no baby photos from the hospital, only pictures from when she was already a few months old. She even remembered once, when she was about 10, asking her mom if she had any keepsakes from her birth. Her mom had gone quiet for a beat too long before brushing it off with, "Nothing important, sweetheart. Just old papers." That same night, unable to sleep, Julia tried to log into her old MySpace account on a whim, something she hadn't thought about in years. When it finally loaded, slow and clunky on her phone, she scrolled through the few posts she'd made back in middle school. It was mostly embarrassing selfies, angsty song lyrics, and random photos of her and Paige. But buried deep in the comments of one blurry birthday picture was something strange. A comment from a profile she didn't recognize. "You're so big now. Can't believe how much you've grown." The account had no photo, no name. Just a first initial, D. Julia had assumed it was one of Paige's relatives or maybe a neighbor from their old block. But now, she wasn't so sure. The date on that comment was 2009. That meant someone had been watching her, quietly, for years. When she brought it up to Paige over coffee a few days later, her friend shrugged it off at first. "Jules, it's probably just some creepy uncle from a family friend. Or a mix-up. You know how the internet was back then. Everyone added everyone." But when Julia mentioned the birthmark, Paige's face went pale. She admitted she'd seen it once, years ago, during a summer pool party, but never thought twice about it. "I just figured it was a weird freckle," she said. "But now this is freaking me out." Trying to make sense of the situation, Julia began compiling a list, names of people from her past, places she'd lived, anyone who might have had access to private details about her life. Mark was the first to come to mind. Not because she thought he had something to hide, but because their breakup had been so emotionless, so mechanical. When she called him to ask if he'd noticed anything strange before they split, odd messages, unusual activity on her accounts, he said no. But there was a hesitation in his voice she couldn't ignore. When she pressed him, he admitted that one night, maybe a year ago, someone had tried to follow her home. He'd brushed it off at the time, thinking it was just a random incident, but now he wasn't so sure. He remembered the guy being tall, maybe late 40s, wearing a dark baseball cap and sunglasses. Said he was just lost, but seemed oddly focused on Julia. They never mentioned it again. Now the paranoia was starting to settle in. Julia began watching her surroundings more carefully, checking reflections in windows, glancing over her shoulder in parking lots. She felt eyes on her even when she was alone. Her phone started acting up, freezing randomly, battery draining faster than usual, apps opening on their own. At first, she thought it was just the usual tech glitches. But when she got a spam email from an unfamiliar domain that included the phrase, "not supposed to be alive" in the subject line, the coincidence was too sharp to ignore. She took her phone to a local repair shop, hoping to find some rational explanation. The technician, a guy in his 20s with a nose ring and a NASA hoodie, ran a few diagnostics. "It's weird," he said. "Your GPS history is full of places you've never been. Like someone's been spoofing your location." When she asked what that meant, he explained that it was like someone had mirrored her device, either remotely or by physically accessing it. "You ever lose your phone? Even for a minute?" Julia couldn't remember. But there had been that one night, a few months ago, when she came home from a bar and couldn't find it for hours. Thought she left it in an Uber. It turned up in her bathroom the next morning. She assumed she'd just been drunk and careless. Now she wasn't so sure. Feeling more anxious than ever, she began digging into her adoptive parents' past. John and Marlene were good people, kind, steady, always there for her. But the way they responded when she started asking deeper questions raised red flags. Her mom became defensive. "Why are you dredging all this up now?" she asked. We've told you everything we know. But her dad was quieter, more thoughtful. He admitted that the lawyer who handled her adoption wasn't someone they'd known personally. He was recommended by a friend of a friend.
It was a closed deal, he said.
We didn't ask too many questions. We were just happy to have you. Julia couldn't blame them. But part of her couldn't stop thinking about what that meant. What if she hadn't been legally placed? What if someone had pulled strings behind the scenes to make her disappear from one life and appear in another? The mystery deepened when she received a manila envelope in her mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, black and white, grainy, faded. It showed a woman holding a baby in a hospital room. Julia didn't recognize the woman, but the baby, she felt a shiver when she saw the birthmark, faint but visible, on the infant's shoulder. No note, no explanation, just a photo and a whisper of something long buried. She turned to online communities, Reddit forums, TikTok threads, YouTube comments. She shared the image on a subreddit dedicated to unraveling unsolved adoption mysteries. Within hours, users began posting theories. Some believed she was part of a black market adoption ring from the early 90s. Others thought she might be linked to a cold case involving a stolen child. One user, claiming to be a retired nurse, said the hospital room in the photo looked like it came from a now-defunct clinic in Santa Fe, one that was shut down in the late 90s after allegations of illegal surrogacy arrangements. That lead opened a whole new chapter of investigation, one that would take Julia across state lines and into the heart of a conspiracy bigger than she ever imagined. But even as she chased clues, the uncertainty only grew. Was the man who left the comment trying to warn her? Or was he the one who'd been following her all along? Was someone trying to help her or lure her into something more dangerous? The more questions she asked, the more dead ends she hit. Every answer only seemed to spark 3 new mysteries. And just when she thought things couldn't get stranger, her world tilted again. She received a voicemail from a blocked number. Just static at first. Then, a man's voice, low, unsteady, and unmistakably familiar. I made a mistake. They'll come for me if they know I told you. But you have to find the doctor. He kept records. Not all of them were destroyed.
Click.
No name. No callback number. Just a hint. Barely enough to go on, but exactly the kind of breadcrumb Julia couldn't ignore. She played the voicemail over and over, trying to place the voice. And then it hit her. It sounded almost exactly like her adoptive father. Except not quite. It was a voice she recognized deep down but didn't fully understand. Which raised one more terrifying possibility she hadn't considered before. What if the man who raised her wasn't the only father she had? And what if the other one was still out there? The voicemail had opened a door Julia couldn't close. For days, she couldn't focus at work, barely slept, and jumped at every unexpected knock or message alert. That voice kept playing in her mind like a broken record. You have to find the doctor. But no name. No city. Just that cryptic warning and the idea that not all records had been destroyed. With no clear direction, she began scouring everything she could find about closed clinics in Santa Fe, especially ones linked to birth records or fertility services in the late 90s. Most searches turned up old articles, lawsuits buried in digital archives, or dead links from forums that hadn't been active in years. She posted again in the subreddit, asking for any known doctors who worked at the now-defunct Santa Fe Wellness Center. One user responded with a blurry newspaper clipping, an article from 1998 mentioning the clinic's abrupt closure, and a brief quote from a man named Dr. Stephen Harrow, who had reportedly gone off the grid shortly after the investigation began. That name was the first real lead she had. Julia tracked down a public records site that listed former employees in the area. No recent address, no social media profiles, and no trace of Dr. Harrow in any current licensing databases. But she did find a P.O. box registered under his name in a small New Mexico town just outside Albuquerque. It was a stretch, but she knew she had to go. She told her boss she needed personal leave and packed a bag that night, not even sure what she'd say if she actually found him, if he was even alive. As she was locking up her apartment, she noticed something strange. Her front doorknob had a faint smear of what looked like red clay. Not dirt, not dust, clay, the kind you'd find in the Southwest. It sent a chill up her spine. Had someone already been there? Watching her? Was this a warning? Halfway into her drive through the desert, her car's GPS froze again. Then her phone restarted without warning and displayed a strange screen before returning to normal. She didn't know if it was a glitch or something more, but it rattled her enough to pull over at a diner and catch her breath. While sipping a lukewarm cup of coffee, she noticed a man in the corner booth watching her. Not overtly, but with that same subtle, lingering attention she'd felt before. When she got up to leave, he followed her outside and called her name. Julia? She froze. He looked to be in his late 50s, weathered face, salt and pepper beard. I knew your mother, he said quietly. The one who had you before the papers were signed. Her heart stopped. She asked who he was, but he didn't give a name. Just warned her to be careful. There are people who don't want this coming out. People with money. People who lost a lot when the clinic shut down. If you're close to Harrow, turn around now. She tried to press him, but he walked away, disappearing into a beat-up pickup that pulled out of the lot before she could get the plates. That night at the motel, she barely slept. Every creak in the walls made her flinch. The next morning, she made it to the address connected to the P.O. box, a rundown trailer on the edge of a dry, dusty lot with scattered cacti and wind-battered fencing. But the trailer was empty. No sign of life. She knocked anyway. Waited. Nothing. Just as she turned to leave, she noticed a small metal box nailed under the porch, rusted, barely hanging on. Inside was a stack of envelopes wrapped in plastic, most of them addressed to initials. Not full names. One envelope, marked simply JM in blue ink, was half opened. She slid it out and unfolded the letter. Her hands trembled as she read, I kept the photos. I know what they did. If you're reading this, they're probably watching you already.
I'm sorry.
I should have spoken up years ago. But I didn't know they'd take her.
I didn't know they'd take you.
Her breath caught in her throat. Was this meant for her? Who was they? Who had taken her? Before she could process it, the trailer door creaked open behind her. She turned around, heart racing. But no one was there. She stepped inside cautiously, calling out. The trailer was dusty, filled with medical files, papers pinned to corkboards, old photographs, and faded Polaroids taped to the walls. One wall had a photo of a young woman that made Julia freeze. She recognized the face, not from real life, but from the black and white photo in the manila envelope. The woman holding the baby. Julia's supposed mother. As she moved closer, her foot hit a metal box on the floor. She bent down and opened it. Inside was a stack of floppy disks and an old digital camera, dusty but intact. She pocketed it. But just as she turned to leave, she heard the sound of tires crunching gravel outside. A black SUV was pulling into the lot. Not a local car. Tinted windows. No plates. Panic surged through her as she slipped out the back of the trailer and into the brush. She crouched behind a cluster of mesquite trees, heart pounding, watching as two men stepped out. One held a tablet, the other what looked like a silencer-equipped pistol. They moved quickly, not like thieves or squatters, but like professionals. Someone had sent them. She waited until they entered the trailer and sprinted back to her car, gunning the engine and tearing out of the lot before they could see her. She didn't stop until she hit a gas station 2 towns over. When she finally checked the digital camera, it still worked. The last image on the card was dated 2001 and showed a newborn in an incubator, tagged with a name that wasn't hers. But there, on the baby's shoulder, was the same mark. The same curved birthmark Julia had hidden under sweaters and sleeves her whole life. Only the name on the tag read, Isabel Reyes. Not Julia Morgan. The identity she'd lived with might never have belonged to her. And worse, someone out there knew exactly who she really was and was willing to kill to keep it buried. Julia sat motionless in the front seat of her rental car, engine idling, eyes fixed on the name glowing from the tiny screen of the digital camera like it had just shattered her reality. Isabel Reyes. The name meant nothing to her, not on the surface. But it was tied to the image of a baby with her birthmark, lying in a sterile hospital incubator from a time when she was supposedly home in Denver, cradled in her adoptive mother's arms. She stared at the photo, her mind racing, trying to reconcile the warm, curated childhood she'd grown up with against the possibility that her entire life was built on a lie. For the first time since the message on her selfie, she felt true fear, not the kind that makes you jump, but the kind that wraps itself around her ribs and squeezes, telling you that you've stepped too deep into something you were never supposed to touch. And she wasn't the only one. Back in Denver, while Julia was piecing together clues from a desert trailer and dodging black SUVs, her best friend Paige received a package that changed everything. It arrived with no return address, wrapped in plain brown paper, and inside was a small, flat wooden box. No markings, no note, just a single Polaroid tucked under the lid. The picture showed Julia at around age 6, grinning in a park that Paige didn't recognize. But that wasn't the strange part. Standing a few feet behind her in the photo, just barely visible in the background, was a woman with sunglasses and a scarf covering her hair. The image was blurry, almost amateurish, but something about the woman's posture, the way she stood like she was guarding something, made Paige's stomach twist. Someone had been watching Julia since she was a child. And more unsettling than that, someone wanted Paige to know. Paige tried calling Julia, but the call went straight to voicemail. Nervous and unsure of what to do, she turned to Mark, Julia's ex. It wasn't a move she took lightly, but with Julia out of contact and strange photos arriving in the mail, she felt like she needed help. Mark showed up within the hour, visibly shaken when he saw the photo. At first, Paige assumed it was the same fear she felt. But something about his reaction was off. He held the Polaroid a moment too long, stared a little too intently. And then he said something she didn't expect. "I think I've seen this woman before," he muttered. "When we were still together. She came up to me outside the pharmacy once. Said something weird. Asked if Julia had ever been to Mexico." That detail had never come up before. Julia had never mentioned it, and Mark had never brought it up during any of their recent conversations. But now, with everything spiraling, Paige couldn't ignore it. She asked why he hadn't said anything earlier. Mark looked pale, almost guilty, and mumbled something about not wanting to worry Julia when she was already dealing with so much. But Paige could see it in his eyes. There was more he wasn't saying. Maybe a lot more. Meanwhile, Julia had driven through the night, her mind a tangle of memories and fear. She needed answers, and she needed someone she could trust. She thought of her adoptive father, John. The man who raised her, taught her to ride a bike, walked her through every scraped knee and heartbreak. If anyone could help her sort through this, it would be him. But when she arrived at her parents' house just after sunrise, something felt off immediately. Her mom's car was in the driveway, but the curtains were drawn, and the porch light was still on even though the sun was fully up. She knocked, then rang the bell. No answer. She used her spare key and stepped inside. The house was quiet, too quiet. Coffee grounds were still in the machine. A newspaper lay untouched on the kitchen table. But no one was home. Her parents had vanished without a trace. Panicking, Julia called Paige. This time, the call went through. Paige answered breathless, launched straight into what she'd received in the mail. When she mentioned the photo, Julia felt like the ground shifted beneath her. She demanded Paige send a photo of the Polaroid, and when it came through, Julia's breath hitched. It was the same park she'd visited once with her parents on a road trip to Arizona, but she didn't remember anyone taking pictures. And the woman in the background? Julia had seen her before. In another image, tucked in the trailer alongside the medical files. Only back then, the woman wasn't hiding. She was standing proudly in front of a building labeled Reyes Women's Clinic. The last name chilled Julia to her core. Reyes. Isabel Reyes. Her real name. The trail was twisting in ways she hadn't expected. The woman in the photo might be her biological mother, or someone connected to her. But why would she have shown up when Julia was a child? And why send the image to Paige now? Unless this wasn't just about Julia. Unless Paige was somehow part of it too. Part of something Julia never suspected. After all, Paige's family had lived just 2 blocks over growing up. Their moms had gone to the same church, volunteered at the same events, hosted cookouts together. But what if that proximity hadn't been coincidence? What if someone had placed Paige there? What if her entire friendship was orchestrated from the beginning? The thought felt insane, but less insane than everything else that had happened. Julia tried to shake it off, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. This time it was a text. No words, just a photo. It showed a familiar diner, the same one she'd stopped at the day before. And there she was, sitting in the booth, sipping coffee. The image was taken from across the room, clearly a zoomed-in shot from a distance. But she hadn't seen anyone taking photos. The timestamp was from just minutes before the strange man approached her outside. Someone had been following her before the warning, and now they were letting her know. As she stared at the image, a new message popped up. "You're not supposed to be alive." Julia's blood ran cold. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to scare her. They were tracking her every move. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one living a life that didn't belong to her. But the biggest question remained. If someone went through this much trouble to erase the truth, what was so dangerous about who she really was? And why, after all these years, were they suddenly so desperate to keep her from remembering? The moment Julia saw the message, "You're not supposed to be alive," something in her broke. Not like a sudden snap, but a slow, painful crack that started somewhere deep beneath the surface, spreading through every bone and breath. She dropped the phone in her lap and stared out the windshield of the car, which was still parked in front of her parents' eerily empty house. Morning light had settled over the quiet Denver neighborhood, casting a warm glow on the cul-de-sac, but it felt wrong. Too calm for what she now knew. The normalcy of it all only made her skin crawl. Her thoughts began spiraling, asking the same questions over and over. Who was watching her? Who knew where she was before she even knew? How long had she been living inside this illusion? But the most terrifying question, the one she hadn't wanted to face until now, had her whole life been orchestrated to keep her from discovering the truth? She went inside and locked every door, drawing curtains and pacing from room to room. Her parents' absence was the most disturbing part. They never left without calling her, and there was no note, no luggage missing, no signs of a planned trip. It felt like they had vanished in the middle of a normal day. She tried their phones again. Straight to voicemail. She called local hospitals, nothing. Then the police, who said they couldn't file a missing person report until 24 hours had passed. Julia nearly screamed. The world was treating this like a minor inconvenience, but in her gut, she knew something had gone terribly wrong. And she couldn't ignore the timing, how everything had exploded the moment she got close to that trailer in New Mexico. The people in the SUV hadn't been bluffing. Whoever they were powerful enough to make people disappear. And now they had her parents. By mid-afternoon, the paranoia had started to bleed into everything. Every car that drove by made her tense up. Every ring of the doorbell sent her pulse into overdrive. When the mail arrived, she waited until the carrier left before checking the box, heart pounding. Among the usual bills and flyers was a single unmarked envelope. No name, no return address. Inside was a photo of her parents, taken from behind as they walked into a grocery store the week before. They looked unaware, normal. But on the back of the photo, written in thick black marker, were 4 chilling words. "They are collateral now." Her stomach flipped, and the world tilted beneath her. This wasn't a warning anymore. It was a threat. And the message was crystal clear. Stop digging, or the people she loved would suffer. She collapsed onto the floor of the living room, struggling to catch her breath. Her hands trembled as she stared at the photo. The fear wasn't abstract anymore. It was personal, invasive, and razor-sharp. She wasn't just being followed. She was being manipulated, punished for daring to look behind the curtain. She thought about running, just leaving everything behind and disappearing. Changing her name, ditching her phone, living off the grid. But a voice inside her, one that had been quiet all her life, finally screamed loud enough to cut through the terror. If she ran now, they'd win. If she stayed silent, her parents might never come back. And most of all, She'd never know who she really was. Still, doubt kept gnawing at her. The camera, the baby photo, the name Isabel Reyes. It all pointed to a life that wasn't hers, to a system that had rewritten her history. But what if it went even deeper? What if she hadn't been the only one? Her thoughts drifted back to Mark. Something about his behavior hadn't sat right with her. His reaction to the Polaroid, his story about the mystery woman outside the pharmacy. It had been too specific, too convenient. She decided to drive to his apartment across town and confront him directly, needing answers he might not willingly give. But when she arrived, something was off. His car was in the lot, but the blinds were drawn tight. She knocked on the door. No answer. She called out his name. Silence. Growing uneasy, she circled the building and saw his back patio door slightly ajar, the screen swaying with the wind. Against her better judgment, she stepped inside. The apartment smelled faintly metallic, and it was colder than it should have been. The living room was trashed, papers everywhere, shelves overturned. The television had been smashed, and there were clear signs of a struggle. Julia's heart leapt into her throat. She called out again, more urgently, but only the echo of her own voice answered back. She walked slowly toward the hallway, every instinct screaming at her to turn around and leave. But then she saw it. Mark's phone, lying face up on the floor beside the bathroom door, its screen cracked but still on. A message thread was open. The last text he received had just 3 words: "Too close again." Julia's eyes burned with tears. She didn't know if Mark had been working against her, helping her, or simply caught in the crossfire. But now he was gone, and she couldn't shake the feeling that it was her fault. She left the apartment in a daze, no closer to answers, but drowning in more questions. Why was someone targeting the people around her? What exactly had they found in that clinic all those years ago that was dangerous enough to destroy entire lives? And most disturbing of all, what if Julia wasn't the only person who had been switched, erased, or renamed? As night fell, she checked into a roadside motel under a false name and spent hours combing through the digital camera again. One of the last folders was password protected. She hadn't noticed it before. But as she stared at the lock icon on the screen, something clicked. Her real name, Isabel Reyes. She typed it in. The folder opened. Inside were dozens of photos, all of different children, some as babies, some older. Each one had a tag: IR 007, JM 012, CR 019, like some kind of tracking system. Then came the documents. Medical charts, charts that didn't match. Names with different blood types, DNA sequences that had been altered or replaced. Page after page of identity swaps, falsified birth records, and hidden adoptions. It wasn't a clinic. It was a cover operation. A human experiment. Julia stared in horror, realizing she had stumbled into something far bigger than a lost identity. She wasn't just trying to find out who she was. She might be the last living trace of something they thought they buried 25 years ago, and now that she was waking up to the truth, they were coming to finish what they started. The clock in the dingy motel room ticked like a bomb. Julia sat cross-legged on the bed, surrounded by scattered documents, photographs, and the open laptop glowing with fragments of her forgotten past. She had barely slept. Every noise outside sent her pulse racing, and even the flicker of a car's headlights through the window curtains made her duck out of sight. But nothing compared to what she felt now, staring at the spreadsheet she had just uncovered in the hidden folder. It wasn't just records, it was a list. A long one. Each name linked to a photo, a birth date, and a column titled Relocated Identity. There were at least 30 individuals listed, all of them children when the files were created. Her own name, Isabel Reyes, was there, coded as IR 011. But what turned her blood to ice wasn't seeing her name. It was seeing pages. PR 013, Paige Rowan, status, observed. Memory reinforced. Role, companion/anchor. Julia's throat dried. She blinked at the screen, willing it to change, to glitch, to reveal it was some cruel mistake. But the name remained, carved in digital ink like a confession from a ghost. Paige wasn't just her best friend. She had been assigned to her, implanted, somehow involved in keeping Julia anchored to a version of her life that wasn't real. The label companion/anchor made her stomach churn, like Paige's entire existence in her world had been part of a system to control her. The flashbacks rushed in all at once. Paige always being there first when she was upset, always knowing what to say, always steering conversations away from Julia's biological past or cutting off questions before they got too deep. It had felt like friendship,
But now it felt like programming.
Julia reached for her phone, heart pounding. She wanted to confront Paige, scream at her, demand to know how long she had been lying. But something in her held back. If Paige had been part of the system this entire time, then confronting her directly could be dangerous. Maybe even deadly. Julia's fingers hovered over the call button before retreating. She needed proof, something Paige couldn't talk her out of, something she could use to unravel whatever role Paige was truly playing in this nightmare. Just then a knock came at the door. 3 slow taps. Not rushed. Almost rehearsed. Julia froze. The front desk hadn't been told her real name. No one should have known she was here. She reached for the camera, slid the documents under the bed, and crept toward the peephole. But no one was there. Her chest tightened. She waited in silence, staring at the empty parking lot. After several long minutes, she opened the door a crack. A single flash drive lay on the ground. No note. No markings. She picked it up cautiously, like it might explode. Back inside, she plugged it into the laptop. 1 folder. 1 video. A surveillance recording dated 6 months ago. The video was grainy, black and white, timestamped 2:13 a.m. It showed an office, sterile, medical, institutional. A man in a lab coat sat behind a desk, flipping through documents. Across from him, a woman stood stiffly, nervously adjusting the strap of her handbag. Julia's heart nearly stopped. It was Paige. She looked younger in the video, or maybe just more uncertain. She kept glancing over her shoulder as if she was afraid of being seen. The man handed her a file. The audio was muffled, but enough words came through to make Julia feel like the ground was splitting beneath her. Progressing faster than expected. Reinforcement protocol must be maintained. If she remembers too much, the others might awaken. Julia clutched the laptop as her breathing grew shallow. Others? What others? This wasn't just about her identity. This was something far more coordinated, an entire network of manipulated identities, suppressed memories, and designed relationships. She skipped ahead in the video, heart hammering. The last thing Paige said before walking out of the room, in perfect clarity, was, "She trusts me completely. She'll never suspect a thing." Julia slammed the laptop shut and backed away from the bed. Her entire life, her relationships, her decisions, her grief, her joy, how much of it had been real? Had Paige ever actually been her friend? Or had she just been a handler, placed in Julia's orbit to keep her compliant and confused? Before she could even fully process the betrayal, her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. This time it was a voicemail. She pressed play with shaking hands. The voice was unmistakable. Her father. "Julia, I don't have much time. If you get this, know that we never wanted this for you. We were supposed to protect you, not raise you under false names. They said you'd never remember, but your mother couldn't stand the guilt. They're watching us now. We're going away. Please don't try to find us. And whatever you do, don't trust Paige." The message cut off suddenly. Julia stood frozen in the middle of the room, everything spinning. The truth hadn't just been hidden from her. It had been buried under layers of deception, cloaked in love, sealed with betrayal. She had trusted Paige with everything. And now, she wasn't sure who Paige really was or what she was still hiding. But there was one thing she was sure of. Someone didn't just erase her identity. They built her a new one. And if Paige was involved, there was no telling how deep the web went. The motel room felt colder now, not because the temperature had dropped, but because something inside Julia had shifted. That voicemail, her father's voice laced with panic, regret, and fear, echoed in her mind like a warning shot fired too late. Everything she'd believed about her life, her parents, and her best friend had fractured into a million sharp pieces. There was no going back to normal after this. Not when she now knew that Paige, the one person she had leaned on during her most vulnerable years, had been planted in her life like a controlled variable in an experiment. And the worst part was, Julia didn't know where the lie ended and the truth began. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she drove. For hours, through back roads and gas station stops, across state lines with her phone turned off and the GPS stripped from her car. By dawn, she was in southern Utah, parked at a trailhead she used to hike with her father as a teenager. A place that once felt like peace now felt like neutral ground, distant from every memory touched by deceit. She sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel, trying to make a plan, but there was no blueprint for how to dismantle your life while trying to survive it. Her mind kept circling back to Paige. And the question that haunted her wasn't why Paige did it. It was whether Paige ever actually cared about her at all. Or if every memory, every laugh, every vulnerable conversation had been scripted by someone else. Julia knew she needed answers, and she knew the only way to get them was to confront Paige directly. She turned her phone on and waited. The moment the signal returned, it lit up with new voicemails and texts. One stood out. It was from Paige. "I need to see you. I know you found the video. Please let me explain before you do something dangerous." Julia stared at it, her emotions a storm of anger, heartbreak, and confusion. Every instinct screamed at her not to respond, but part of her needed to look Paige in the eyes and hear the truth, even if it shattered what little remained of her trust. They met at a public park in Flagstaff. Middle of the day. Open space. Neutral ground. Julia chose the spot carefully, knowing she couldn't risk another ambush. When Paige arrived, she looked different, less put together, like she hadn't slept either. Her eyes were swollen, her hair pulled back in a way Julia hadn't seen since high school. For a long moment, they just stood there, the air between them thick with history and secrets. "I wanted to tell you," Paige began, her voice shaky, so many times. "But I was under surveillance too. If I told you anything, they would have taken me out of your life completely, and back then, I couldn't handle that. I didn't know how to exist without you." Julia stared at her, trying to decipher if that was the voice of guilt or manipulation. "So you played along. For 20 years. You kept me in the dark while they rewrote my entire life. I didn't know the full extent of what they did to you at first. I only found out when we were teenagers," Paige said, stepping closer. "They told me you had been relocated for your own protection, that your biological parents were part of something dangerous. They made it sound like you'd been saved." Julia's chest tightened. Saved from what? Paige looked away. From the program. From what they were doing to the others. You were one of the few they let go because your parents made a deal. That word, program, slammed into Julia like a freight train. It wasn't just identity theft. It was systemic. Controlled. Government-sanctioned or corporate-funded. She didn't know yet. But it wasn't random. What kind of deal? Paige hesitated. They agreed to raise you under surveillance. To keep you in place. In exchange, you'd be safe, and they'd be left alone. That's why they never told you. That's why we all played roles. Julia felt nauseous. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was foundational. Her parents hadn't just lied, they had bartered her life for safety. And Paige hadn't just been a friend. She had been the invisible leash keeping Julia within the parameters of the life others had built for her. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because it's spiraling out of control," Paige said, eyes pleading. "When you went to New Mexico, you triggered an alert. The files you found weren't supposed to be accessible. Now, they're trying to clean it up. And they won't stop until you're either silent or gone." Julia backed away. "So what do I do? Disappear? Let them win?" "No," Paige said, voice firming. "There's a contact I know. He used to work inside the program before he broke away. He's been trying to expose it for years, but he needed someone like you, someone they invested in. Someone with proof. Why should I trust anything you say?" Julia shot back, eyes burning. "You say you care, but you still help them monitor me. You watch me suffer, question everything, and you let it happen. I made the wrong choices, Paige whispered, tears forming. But I'm trying to make it right.
Please.
This is your only chance to take them down. Julia stood in silence, a war raging inside her. If she walked away now, she could try to disappear and live a quiet, disconnected life. But that meant letting whoever ran this program keep rewriting people's lives in secret. It meant letting Mark's disappearance go unanswered. Letting her parents' cowardice win. But if she pursued this contact, if she kept digging, it meant putting a target squarely on her back again, and possibly losing the last person in her life who still called her by name, even if it was for the wrong reasons. Then Paige gave her a burner phone and a flash drive. If you change your mind, call the number saved under Owl. He'll explain everything. Julia took it but said nothing. Her head throbbed, and her chest ached with too many truths she wasn't ready to accept. She turned and walked away, each step heavier than the last. She didn't know what was worse anymore, being lied to, or learning that the truth required her to risk everything she had left. And as she drove back to the motel, watching the shadows of trees blur past the window, she didn't notice the car that had been following her since she left the park. No headlights. No sound. Just one silent figure behind tinted glass, lifting a phone and muttering a few words into the receiver. She made contact. Initiate Phase 3. Julia hadn't felt safe in days, but what she felt now wasn't just fear. It was the crushing weight of inevitability. She was in too deep, and every step closer to the truth pulled her further away from any version of her old life. The burner phone Paige had given her vibrated once inside the glove box as she crossed the Nevada state line. The number under Owl flashed on the cracked screen. She hesitated for only a second before answering, half expecting silence or a robotic voice. But instead, it was a man, low voice, clipped sentences, like someone who didn't speak unless he had to. "You're late," he said. "I didn't agree to anything yet," Julia snapped. "You called. That means you're ready." She didn't argue. She needed answers more than she needed pride. They met in a shuttered casino outside Tonopah, where the neon signs flickered with leftover electricity from a forgotten era. The man who called himself Owl was ex-military, mid-50s, all scars and stubble, with the posture of someone who never truly left the battlefield. He laid out everything in one breathless hour: documents, maps, recordings, dossiers marked confidential and redacted. Julia sat there, heart pounding, hands trembling, as she realized the truth wasn't just about her stolen identity. It was about hundreds, maybe thousands of others. The program, codenamed Project Sycamore, was a covert psychological conditioning network created in the aftermath of a classified DARPA initiative that had quietly gone offline in the early 2000s, at least on paper. But it hadn't stopped. It had evolved. It started with children, orphans, runaways, kids taken from unstable homes or donated through backdoor deals. Their memories were wiped, identities reassigned, and entire lives manufactured using civilian proxies. Families were paid off or manipulated, and handlers, like Paige, were embedded to ensure emotional compliance. The endgame? No one truly knew, but all believed it was part of a larger behavioral control experiment designed to track, study, and manipulate long-term loyalty and trust across generations. The targets didn't know they were test subjects. Most still didn't. But Julia was different. She had started to remember, and that made her a liability. She sat in stunned silence, processing the scale. Her life was one story out of 1,000. The people she'd passed on the street, co-workers she'd known, even classmates from childhood, any one of them could have been part of the same program. It wasn't a matter of if someone was lying to her anymore. It was how many. That's when Owl dropped the final blow. Your father wasn't just a parent in this. He was one of the original architects. So was Paige's mother. Julia felt her chest cave in. That's not possible. He left the message. He tried to warn me.
Exactly.
Because he changed his mind. He thought you were one of the safe ones. But when he found out they never stopped the trials, he tried to burn it down from the inside. That's why he vanished. He was silenced. Julia stood up, pacing, unable to breathe. Her entire existence was a chessboard. Every move she thought she made of her own free will had been anticipated years ago. All the while, people she loved were playing both sides of the game. And then it hit her. If her father had once been involved and Paige's mother too, then what about her mother? "She's gone," she whispered, the old ache flaring up again. "She died when I was 12. "No," Al said without flinching. "That's what they told you. But I have reason to believe she's still alive, and she may be the key to bringing the whole thing down." Julia's knees nearly buckled. It was too much. Too fast. She had barely accepted who she wasn't, let alone who she might still be. They had to leave immediately. The signal from the burner had likely been traced, and Al wasn't taking chances. As they packed up, he handed her one last file, a printed photo of a woman in a secured facility in Idaho, time-stamped just 2 months ago.
Julia stared at the image.
The hair was shorter, the eyes more sunken. But it was her. Her mother. They barely made it out before 2 black SUVs pulled up. Al pushed Julia into a side exit, took out one of the agents with a taser, and yelled at her not to stop for anything. They split up, and she drove off in silence, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, every part of her body screaming with adrenaline. But she wasn't alone for long. An hour later, at a gas station just outside Twin Falls, someone stepped into her path. It was Paige. Her hair was pulled back again, eyes red from crying or exhaustion, maybe both. She held up her hands. "I wasn't followed. I swear." Julia didn't speak. Her mind was spinning. "You knew my mom was alive." "I found out last year," Paige admitted. "They told me she was unfit, that she was in isolation for her own good. I believed them until I saw the photo. She wasn't unstable. She knew too much. And they locked her away to keep her quiet." Julia's rage boiled over. "And you just sat with me every day, pretending none of this mattered?" "I tried to protect you," Paige said, voice breaking. "I thought if I kept things normal, you'd never have to know. But now I realize they were never going to let you live a normal life." Before Julia could answer, her phone lit up with a single alert. "Motion detected. Motel 12 camera. Unauthorized entry." The screen showed a blurred figure ransacking her room. They were closing in. She looked at Paige. At the car. At the folder containing the address, where her mother might still be breathing behind concrete walls and surveillance. And in that moment, Julia knew she had no more time for trust. Not even with Paige. But the truth, whatever it cost, was the only thing worth chasing now. It was still dark when Julia reached the edge of the forest just outside the facility in Idaho. The structure sat in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by fences and cameras camouflaged among pine trees, pretending to be part of the landscape. According to Al's intel, the building had once been a rehabilitation center, a cover for something far less humane. She crouched in the brush, heartbeat hammering in her ears as she stared at the pale glow leaking from the windows. Everything led to this place. Every lie, every betrayal, every question that had haunted her since that selfie on the beach. Somewhere behind those walls was the truth she'd spent her entire life being steered away from. And if her mother was still alive inside, it meant this wasn't just about exposing the program. It was about saving whatever pieces of herself were still buried beneath it. Paige had insisted on coming. Despite everything, Julia allowed it. Not because she trusted her again, but because Paige had finally crossed the line of no return. She knew too much, and either they faced this ending together or not at all. The plan was simple. Enter through the maintenance tunnel Owl had marked on the blueprints, disable the power system on the lower level, and access the server room where years of confidential data was stored. It sounded like something out of a heist movie, except this wasn't fiction. If they got caught, they wouldn't be arrested, they'd be erased. The moment they slipped through the tunnel and crawled into the sub-basement, the air grew heavy, metallic, and sterile. Every surface gleamed with surgical precision, and it became instantly clear that this wasn't a wellness center. It was a lab. They passed observation rooms, lined with two-way mirrors, rows of locked doors labeled only by numbers and QR codes. The silence was unbearable, broken only by the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights above. Paige took the lead through the corridors, hands shaking as she swiped the stolen access card. It beeped green. The door hissed open. The room they entered looked nothing like the rest of the facility. It was warm, lived in, filled with old photographs, books, and a single bed. And sitting on it, gaunt and silent, was the woman Julia thought she had buried 13 years ago. Her mother. She looked up slowly, eyes foggy at first, then startled. Julia? Hearing her name spoken like that nearly buckled her knees. She hadn't realized how much she needed it. The reunion was brief. There wasn't time for tears or long explanations. Her mother gripped her hands and whispered, "You shouldn't have come. They'll know you're here." But it was already too late for regret. Julia needed answers, and her mother, weak as she was, gave them. Project Sycamore hadn't just manipulated identities. It had used biometric data, collected since birth from participants like Julia, to simulate psychological profiles for defense algorithms, testing behavioral compliance in simulated global threat scenarios. The reason so many children had been watched and guided so closely wasn't for safety. It was to see if human loyalty, when manufactured carefully, could be predicted and eventually monetized. Julia's mother had discovered the end goal, turning human behavior into an artificial asset for government contractors and tech giants developing empathy-based warfare simulations. When she objected, they declared her unstable, locked her away, and replaced her with stories of illness and death. As the truth sank in, Julia barely noticed the door opening behind her. She turned too late. Standing there, framed in the harsh white light, was Owl, gun drawn. Paige stepped back instinctively. "Wait, you." "I told you," he said calmly. "The system never ends. You think you're escaping, but you're just circling back into another layer." Julia froze. "You used me. I needed access. I needed someone who could trigger the legacy protocols and activate the backup servers. You were the last uncorrupted node in the chain." Her stomach turned. "You lied about everything."
My dad.
"The program. Even my mother?" He didn't flinch.
No.
"The program is real. Your father did try to dismantle it. And yes, your mother was locked up for knowing too much. But if you think this ends with one exposé or a media leak, you're missing the point. You were built for this. The program designed you to uncover it, so it could evolve. It wasn't just about hiding the truth.
It was about reshaping it."
Suddenly, the lights flickered. A voice crackled over the intercom. "System override. External breach detected. All data nodes transferring." Paige looked at Julia, panic flashing in her eyes. "They're erasing it. Everything." Julia stepped forward, heart pounding. "Not if we stop it." Her mother pointed to the corner of the room, an old terminal with manual input controls. "You can reroute the purge command, but it'll lock the building down." Julia rushed over, typing furiously. All advanced with the weapon, but Paige, in a final act of loyalty, or redemption, lunged at him. The gun went off. The shot rang through the room, but Paige didn't stop. She knocked him off balance, and Julia entered the final string of code. Data archive arrowed. Transfer initiated to external server. She didn't know who would find the files. Maybe a journalist. Maybe a whistleblower. But someone would. The truth would live. Owl was pinned, groaning, the gun sliding across the floor. Julia turned to Paige, who was clutching her side, bleeding. "Go," Paige whispered. "Take your mom. Finish it." Julia grabbed her mother's hand, helping her toward the service elevator, not knowing how much time they had before the backup security teams arrived. As they reached the top floor, alarms blared through the compound, and outside the window, helicopters circled like vultures. The building shook. And then the final twist. On the screen of the control panel behind her, one last message blinked. Program branch Sycamore Beta. Active. Subject 01. Julia Breyer. Status. Compliant. Next phase. Initiate. Everything she'd done, was it part of the design? The doors opened to freedom, but the question echoed louder than the sirens. Was she ever truly in control? The world outside the facility was colder than Julia remembered. After so much time underground, both literally and metaphorically, emerging into the early morning light felt like crossing into another reality. She and her mother, barely able to walk, staggered across a wooded ridge where Owl's escape routes were supposedly mapped out, but none of that mattered now. The data was out. The files were uploaded to encrypted servers that would scatter across independent networks, dark web mirrors, and whistleblower inboxes. Julia had no way of knowing who would see it first, or what they would do with it. But she had done her part. For once, she wasn't a pawn. She was the disruption. Paige had been airlifted out by local authorities after the emergency broadcast triggered an anonymous tip, something all hadn't anticipated. Julia wasn't sure if Paige would survive, but she knew she'd earned her place back in the light. That kind of redemption wasn't easy to come by, and it didn't erase the damage, but maybe it proved one thing. People weren't as predictable as the system had believed. Human choice wasn't a variable you could program with perfect accuracy. There were too many broken pieces, too many stubborn instincts, too many moments like this, messy, raw, and impossible to forecast. Julia looked down at her mother's trembling hand in hers, and for the first time in years, the pain didn't feel like weight. It felt like proof she'd made it out the other side. But peace, as she was quickly learning, wasn't the same as safety. In the days that followed, the story exploded across independent media. Top secret human profiling program exposed, headlined across trending YouTube channels, Reddit threads, and Twitter reposts. Julia's name wasn't in any of the reports. She'd made sure of that, but fragments of her story were, stitched together by journalists brave enough to follow the trail. Some dismissed the leaks as conspiracy, others tied them to real-world tech giants and defense contractors whose algorithms suddenly looked suspiciously similar to what the files described. Government spokespeople denied everything, but that only made the truth harder to bury. Something had changed. The system had been breached in a way it hadn't expected, by the very kind of person it was built to control. Julia stayed off-grid, living under a pseudonym in a quiet Colorado town where no one asked questions. Her mother, still recovering, found comfort in the silence. They spent long evenings talking about memories Julia barely remembered, her dad's laugh, the names of her childhood pets, how her mother once snuck her out during a fire drill to take her to the zoo. The more they talked, the more Julia realized what the program had really stolen from her. Not just privacy or control, but connection. And now, after all this time, she was slowly getting it back. Still, there were nights when she couldn't sleep. Nights when she replayed the last moments in that facility. The blinking screen, the final message, the word compliant. What if the entire journey, every decision she thought she'd made on her own, was part of a larger simulation? What if she had only exposed the part they wanted her to? The files had contained decades of data, yes, but only on a specific branch of the program. And if there was a Sycamore beta, what else was out there? One evening, months later, Julia opened her laptop for the first time since it all ended. Not to check emails or social media, she'd wiped those, but to search for something deeper. She logged onto an encrypted forum used by data analysts and open-source researchers, curious if any patterns had emerged from the leaks. As she scanned through the threads, one comment stood out. Anyone notice the coordinates embedded in the final Sycamore metafile header? Not random. It points to somewhere in Alaska, another facility. The post had no replies. It was buried under hundreds of comments, most of them noise. But something about it felt too specific to ignore. She stared at the screen, heartbeat slow but steady. Maybe this wasn't over. Maybe this wasn't a victory. It was an awakening. The real war hadn't even started yet. Julia closed the laptop and stood by the window, staring out at the quiet neighborhood below. Snow was falling gently, erasing footprints and car tracks, as if nothing had ever disturbed the surface. But underneath, the system was still there, still watching, still adapting, still waiting. And for the first time, Julia wasn't afraid. She was ready.